Karen Constantine, Kent County Councillor for Ramsgate. Would you address that point from Damian Green, who says removing the non-dom status in order to generate revenue for the NHS is a fantasy?
Well, it's an interesting sentence that I've just heard. When you think about the complete incoherent policies of the Tory government and their failure to agree amongst themselves on anything, and the fact that we're here at 75 years of celebrating the NHS, and actually most of the major organisations inside the NHS are absolutely screaming from the top of their lungs that we have to do something to save it, and that is the direct responsibility of the government currently in power, who have really failed the general population. So I think it's a bit rich to criticise the Labour Party. When we were in power last, we did see waiting lists coming down. We did see more doctors and more nurses being recruited into the NHS. And we were tackling the issue of social care, which is incredibly important. And let me tell you, the number of people that are so shocked when it's their elderly relative or them themselves that are discharged from hospital when they're still poorly and still requiring care and attention, but they're discharged back into homes and they can't manage. And people at that stage are aghast. But the truth is, social care is being, once it was in an in-house operation, now it's highly privatised and with a myriad of companies, different terms and conditions, and tends to be characterised by low wages and attracts not the best employees very often, although some care workers are absolutely excellent. So I think it's a bit rich, really, and especially when we compare ourselves to what's happening in the G7 and the other European Union countries.
Let me bring you, if I may, from social care across to medical care. I know how intimately connected they are, which is why we started with that. We've seen the government this week announce its workforce plan. Some will say, 6 years later than Jeremy Hunt promised when he was Health Secretary. Does it go far enough to address staff shortages?
No, I mean, Rishi Sunak's mantra is, I'll grip this. He's not got a grip of this. 5 months ago, he said he would bring down the waiting lists. And the waiting lists have escalated in the past 5 months from 7.2 million to 7.5 million. And bear in mind, there were already 4.5 million before COVID, because that was one of the sorry excuses that I heard, was that the crisis in the NHS system was due to COVID. It's not. It was a crisis before. And now we're hearing terrible tales of declining mortality rates, so people are dying earlier than they could be expected to. People are in pain, waiting for procedures and operations, and the anxiety that is around that. And we've got a government that are failing to involve themselves in any sort of coherent industrial relations.
Okay. Just in order to give Damian Green a chance to respond to that, and in the couple of minutes we've got left before the news, Damian Green, let's talk about the now. What about those waiting lists now? But you say people have praised it, and I've heard praise too, but some have described it, some practitioners, this plan as pouring water into a sieve.
Well, and that's a fair point about the NHS, and that's why it needs reform. That's why reform is one of the key things, because to make sure you're not pouring water into a sieve, make sure that it's run more efficiently is exactly the way to solve both short-term and long-term problems. And I would just observe, incidentally, that Karen didn't remotely attempt to address my point about non-DOBs and just went off into a rant. But actually, there was no defence of what is the Labour Party's alternative, because there isn't one.
So I think we've got a very strong relationship with the NHS. With the Labour Party brought the NHS into being. We know how important it is to people. We're very close to people on the ground, as it were. We'll be very invested in developing the NHS and social care, and listening to the trade unions and the Royal Colleges and the organisations to put it
Your
back
time
together.
Is up. I do apologise for cutting across you. Thank you both so much. Karen Constantine and Damian Green. The news is next.
At midday, I'm John Howick with the latest. As the National Health Service turns 75 today, it's claimed parts of Kent still have some of the worst patient-to-GP ratios in the country.